Hi guys, I wanted to share some thoughts on braided line, when to use it, when not to use it, some of the pros and cons. I'm going to start with braided against the mono. Braid is fantastic. I use it a lot. It does not replace mono. I use them both. Sometimes I use mono more often actually. But braid is fantastic and it absolutely has its place. It's extremely strong for the diameter. That means more capacity on your reels. Also means it cuts through the water nice, so if you want to troll deeper, you can get deeper. The no stretch factor is just incredible. It really adds that sensitivity. You can go out with a $20 rod and feel stuff that you would never feel before, even with the expensive high modulus graphite rods, the $300 G Loomis types, you know. It's great. It has its place. I love it when I am casting and retrieving a bait, if I'm casting and working an artificial bait, if I am drifting with a live bait. It's fantastic. I can feel the bait move. The old joke, you know, this line is so sensitive you can feel when the fish swims by your bait. That's actually only about half joke and it's half truth. When you have your live bait down there and you get used to the pattern of him swimming, you feel that tail, you feel the tail, and all of a sudden it gets jumpy. That's when a fish comes in to look at it, and you absolutely can feel when a fish swims by your bait. Love braid, that's what we use it for. Mono. Mono has a lot of stretch. Okay, we can probably stretch about an inch here out of just a foot length of mono. This is 30 pound here. Mono is very low visibility through the water compared to braid. This is a clear. It has extreme abrasion resistance, great around rocks and pilings. It doesn't last as long as braid, so we swap these out and we change these out probably every couple months. Some people do it once a season, twice a season, but you got to stay on top of it because the sunlight will deteriorate it. The stretch factor in mono is important. It acts as a shock absorber. It's great for live bait, great for chunk bait, and the reason we use it for those situations is I want the fish to be able to pick up the bait and swim with it, turn it in its mouth, get it in its throat before it feels the line. So a good rule of thumb, this works 90% of the time. It works 100% of the time when it comes to bait, chunk or live bait. If the rod is in your hand when the fish strikes, go with braid. If the rod is in a rod holder when the fish strikes, go with mono. When it comes to bait, live or chunk, this is true 100% of the time. All around for artificials and everything, it's true about 90% of the time. That's a great rule of thumb. Now I'm going to show you and discuss the negatives. Okay, braid is great like we talked about. Zero stretch, extreme sensitive, right? Very sensitive, very sensitive. Well, the problem is if you were to cast this out with a chunk of bait, put it in a rod holder and walk away from it, when that fish goes to pick up the bait, it's great that you can feel the fish, that fish can feel you just as well. Probably better because they have much more sensitive mouths than we have hands. You'll see the rod and the rod holder bounce, go down, and come right back up, and that fish is gone. As soon as he feels that rod holder, he's spitting it out. Do not use braid when you put it in the rod holder with bait. Also, the no stretch hurts a lot of times with chunk bait because your chunk bait is sitting on the bottom. You cast it out, you crank it tight so you can watch the rod tip. Striped bass vacuum feed, so do a lot of fish. Fish with big heads, grouper, they vacuum feed. They open those gills and suck the bait right up. If your line is tight and this has no stretch with braid, that fish swims up to that bait, sniffs it, goes to vacuum feed it like it normally does, and the bait doesn't come to him because there's no stretch. He has a harder time getting that bait down. He may have to circle back around, scoop it up. The stretch in the mono gives just enough give where that fish can go ahead and vacuum feed that bait up and everything is normal and you'll catch so many more fish. Downside's the braid. If it's in the rod holder, don't use this. Downsides to mono. Okay, it's thicker. It's going to take up more room on your spool. It doesn't last as long. It does deteriorate. So every few months for us, we swap it out. Abrasion resistance is great. You don't have as much sensitivity with this. So if you're casting artificials, you're going to have to go with a high modulus graphite rod, a sensitive rod to make up for that because you have no sensitivity. Okay, we're going to have some exceptions to the rule now. Remember, with live or chunk bait, it's true 100% of the time, but with artificials, it's 90% of the time. I'm going to tell you why. If you want to troll with artificials, 2, 3, 4 miles an hour, let's say anytime you're using your gas engine, braid can be great because you can get deeper with less line behind the boat. It cuts right through the water a lot better. You can even put a 120-pound braid on, and you're going to get deeper than you would with 30-pound mono. Also, it allows you to avoid having a plug knocker to get your umbrella rigs up or your baits up your snag, because if you use 120, you can get right over it and pull and bend the hooks to get it out. So there's a great advantage to braid when you're trolling. One more exception with braided line: sometimes you're forced to use braid if you're using a small reel, like a small spinning reel. When I have the kids on the boat, I like to use spinning reels. They handle them better. But these small spinning reels don't hold much heavy line on it, and they're not meant for heavy line, so they don't work properly. So in that case, I'll go with like a 30-pound braid so I can fit enough line on the reel, and the reel performs it the way it should. If I do that, I'll couple it with a very soft rod to make up for it. So that's another exception. If you need line capacity, braid is great for that. All right, an exception to the rule with artificials, with mono. If you're casting a topwater plug, I like to go with mono if I can, because that stretch will make up for my excitedness when I see a bass blow up on a bait and I want to yank as hard as I can. You see that bass come up, he's following it, or you just see the sucker explode and your heart races and you knee jerk and you yank and that plug comes flying back at you. With braid, it will come flying back every time. With mono, that'll save you. That excitedness you get, you yank, that mono will stretch, and 9 times out of 10, if the bait is even 20 or 30 feet from you, if it's in the water, it won't come back at you. That stretch will absorb all that shock that you just put into it, and you'll catch more fish on top water. So those are a few exceptions to the rules. Remember, if the rod's in your hand when you're bait fishing, use braid. If it's in the rod holder, use mono. 90% of the time for artificials, 100% of the time for live and cut bait. Stay safe on the water. Leave a few for me. Have fun out there, guys. Thanks.